okay? Let me see him.
It's okay.
The billionaire froze at the sight before him. His wife's wheelchair sat beneath the grand chandelier, and beside her stood the maid, head bowed, tears glinting under the light. In her trembling hands was a faded letter, its paper fragile, but its words powerful enough to break him. She was your mother's blood, too. The air seemed to vanish. For the first time, Arthur Langston, master of empires, was speechless in his own home. Who was this woman he had overlooked? And what secret tied her to everything he thought he knew? This is the story that shattered a billionaire's pride. Welcome, story lovers! Where are you watching from? Hit the like button and drop your city name in the comments so we can see how far our story travels. It was the kind of mansion that seemed to hum with silence, endless halls of marble and glass, polished until they reflected a world that didn't quite feel real. Inside lived Arthur Langston, a billionaire who measured life in numbers, profits, shares, valuations. Once a visionary, he'd become a man surrounded by people but untouched by them. His wife, Evelyn, was the only light left in his otherwise sterile empire. Once radiant, now confined to a wheelchair after a sudden accident that had silenced her laughter and dimmed her eyes. Into this world came Mariah, soft-spoken, meticulous, and invisible by design. She moved like air through the corridors, cleaning what was already clean, making herself smaller than her shadow. Hired through an agency, no one asked her story. To Arthur, she was another service, another transaction. Yet there was something different about her presence, something quiet that unsettled the perfection of the Langston estate. Every morning, she would wheel Evelyn to the garden where sunlight spilled across the white stone paths. She never spoke much, but when she did, Evelyn smiled in a way the doctors hadn't managed in months. Arthur noticed, once, twice, then more often. He didn't understand it. How could a woman who owned nothing bring back warmth to a house built on excess? Still, he watched from a distance. Her patience, her care, the way she brushed the hair from Evelyn's face with such reverence, it was as though she saw something others didn't. And beneath her calm, there was a heaviness in her eyes, a story unspoken. Arthur didn't know it yet, but that quiet maid carried a secret, one that would unravel everything he believed about kindness, class, and worth. In a world built on wealth, he was about to learn the value of something far greater. The days in the Langston mansion fell into a pattern, measured, predictable, and sterile. Yet with each passing morning, Mariah's presence began to stir something Arthur couldn't quite name. She wasn't loud or bold. She didn't seek attention, but there was dignity in her every movement, a kind of quiet grace that refused to be diminished, even by the weight of servitude. He would often see her through the glass walls of his office, pushing Evelyn's wheelchair across the terrace, reading softly from a worn book or tending to the small rose garden that Evelyn loved before her accident. The staff called her the Silent One. Still, Arthur began to notice things others didn't, how she'd arrive early, how she'd sometimes pause at the portrait of his late mother, eyes wet but resolute. It was as if she carried a grief that wasn't hers, or perhaps one she didn't speak of. But not everyone in the house saw her as he did. The senior housekeeper, Mrs. Doran, made her disdain clear. "She doesn't belong here," she whispered one afternoon when Arthur passed through the hall. Too bold for her place. Too comfortable around the madam. It wasn't the first time Mariah had been whispered about. Subtle glances followed her, small cruelties, the kind that weren't shouted but sliced all the same. A cup left deliberately unwashed, her meals delayed, her work doubled. Still, she never complained. Arthur tried to ignore it. In his world, emotions were inefficiencies. Yet one morning, he overheard a conversation that lodged in his chest. From the drawing room, he heard Evelyn laughing, a sound he hadn't heard in months. "Mariah," she said gently, "you remind me of someone I once knew." A pause. "You carry the same strength my mother spoke of." Arthur froze. His mother's words, those exact words, had once been told to him when he was a boy. But his mother had grown up in a poor southern town, raised by a woman whose name was whispered but never spoken aloud in family circles. A woman who had cared for her during the hardest years, when the world outside their door judged by color, not kindness. Could it be? Later that night, Arthur found Mariah in the kitchen, wiping the counters after everyone had gone. He almost asked then, but pride stopped him. Instead, he observed quietly, and then he noticed something that made his breath catch, a small silver locket around her neck, engraved with initials he hadn't seen in years, CL. The same initials etched on the back of an old photograph that sat in his late mother's study. From that moment, curiosity turned into obsession. Who was she? Why was she here? Why had she never spoken of it? The questions gnawed at him, even as his own biases whispered that such a connection was impossible. A maid? Related to his family's past? No. Unthinkable, but beneath the surface. The truth was waiting, and when it emerged, it would shatter not just his assumptions, but the fragile order of the world he'd built around himself. The revelation came on a storm-soaked evening. Thunder rolled over the mansion as Arthur searched for Mariah, his thoughts restless, the image of that silver locket burning in his mind. He found her in the library, standing by the window, watching the rain streak the glass. For once, she didn't avert her eyes when he entered. "Tell me the truth," he demanded quietly. "That locket, where did you get it?" Her fingers brushed against it protectively. "It belonged to my grandmother," she said, voice steady. "Clara Langston," the name hit him like a blow. Clara Langston, his mother's nanny, a black woman dismissed without recognition when whispers about her closeness to the family grew uncomfortable. The stories had been erased, her memory buried beneath wealth and shame. Arthur's pulse pounded. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice betrayed doubt. Mariah met his gaze, unflinching. "She was cast aside, yet she raised your mother as her own. She wrote letters your family never answered. I kept them." She reached into her apron, unfolding fragile pages, yellowed with time. His mother's handwriting covered them, thank yous, promises, apologies. And at the end of one letter, "If I could rewrite the world, I'd start by giving Clara back her name." The room fell silent, except for the storm's rage outside. Arthur's knees weakened. The woman he had dismissed, the maid he'd barely noticed, was his blood. His family's forgotten truth stood before him, holding everything he'd spent a lifetime ignoring. Dear audience, where are you watching from? Drop your city name in the comments. When dawn broke, the mansion no longer felt the same. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in every corner. Arthur sat in his mother's study, the letters spread across her old desk like confessions long overdue. For the first time, he saw his family's fortune not as triumph, but as an inheritance built on silence, on the erasure of those whose hands had carried its foundation. Mariah didn't ask for forgiveness. She didn't need to. Her truth wasn't a weapon, it was a mirror. In her quiet dignity, Arthur saw the hollowness of his wealth and the blindness of generations before him. Evelyn moved to tears, reached for Mariah's hand, her voice breaking with gratitude. "You brought life back into this house," she whispered. "Not through duty, but through truth." Within weeks, Arthur made a decision that stunned the world. He established the Clara Langston Foundation, dedicated to restoring opportunities for women of color in domestic work, education, and health care. It wasn't charity. It was restitution. And when reporters asked why, his answer was simple. Because family is not defined by wealth, it's defined by humanity. Mariah continued to care for Evelyn, but now she walked the halls not as a servant, but as a legacy reborn. And sometimes late at night, Arthur would glance at that old locket resting in the light of the fire, reminded that justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through generations, waiting for someone to finally listen. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more powerful stories like this one.